Can you hear me now? That needs to be muted. Alrighty, good to know. I guess we'll get started shortly here. Okay, well, hey, I'm Ian Freeman. Thanks for coming out to the Agora I/O. I'm glad it's been working out all weekend, and I'm glad that George has given me the opportunity to give you a little bit of information about pirate radio, or free radio, or community radio, or micro radio, or unlicensed radio. There are different names for this particular concept, but it certainly fits in with the general theme of this weekend's conference, the Agora, the idea of doing things without government permission. And I think that I've actually been listening to a number of the talks throughout the weekend so far, and some people have brought up pirate radio as something that they think is a pretty good idea. And I happen to agree. I think it's probably one of the most effective forms of activism that can be done. Uh, the radio is still a very popular medium. There are people that think that, well, the internet is the future, and of course they're right about that. But radio is approximately 100-year-old technology that is still very ubiquitous in our lives today. In fact, I don't know the numbers exactly, but I think it's well over 95% or somewhere around there of Americans, they still listen to the radio at least once a week, if not every single day. Lots of people are still listening on their ride to work, their commute. Of course, we're starting to see more cars, as Corey Moore was presenting earlier today. We're seeing more cars getting internet in their dashboards, and so obviously, old broadcast radio has some challenges in its very near future. But that doesn't mean that there aren't people that are still listening in droves to this old technology. And if we can get the message of liberty out via broadcast radio, then we absolutely should. And so pirate radio, micro radio, etc., is a way to do that at a really low cost. I guess a little bit of history about me for those that don't know. I host Free Talk Live. It's a nationally syndicated talk radio program that currently appears on 94 radio stations. It's taken a while to build that to that level. And I actually started with my interest in radio by being interested in pirate radio first. So when I was a teenager, I guess when I was younger than a teenager, I started getting into just radio in general, whether it be CB or shortwave. Just was kind of a radio geek, and discovered pirate radio through the world of shortwave radio, where there are people that will transmit. I think there are probably different frequencies, but one of the more popular ones is 6.955 megahertz. And shortwave allows for transmissions to propagate pretty much around the world with very low wattage. Of course, the signal quality also tends to, well, leave something to be desired. And obviously, it's only something that hobbyists, people that are into shortwave radio, could possibly receive. So that's kind of one genre of pirate radio. But today we're going to be talking mostly about the genre of pirate radio that is something that everybody can receive, everybody with an AM or FM receiver, which is pretty much anybody that has a car. And I think there are multiple AM and FM receivers in any given household. Your clock radio in your bedroom or whatever, shower radios. I mean, radios are ubiquitous throughout our lives. So you want to get your signal where it's going to be heard. AM, not really the best place to be. Most of the people that are under the age of 65 or under the age of 40 aren't listening to AM radio. So the younger the segment that you're trying to attract, the less likely they're going to be, the less likely they're even going to know the AM band exists. It wouldn't hurt to have a signal on AM, but FM is where it's at as far as where pirate radio signals are concerned. So anyway, I host Free Talk Live, and I got into pirate radio from my interest in shortwave. And that's kind of how I got excited about it. Like, wow, cool! I would love to have my own radio station. And I thought, well, what does it take? Because at that time, probably at age 16, I wasn't of the same liberty mindset that I am today. And so naturally, I went and I looked into what it would take to actually start a radio station, like legally through the FCC channels. And that's when I learned how incredibly difficult that process was. Like incredibly difficult. Lots of money is required, hiring lawyers, hiring engineering firms, just insane. The amount of money that it would take to even just apply for the permit, I don't even know. I tried to figure it out. It's almost impossible to discern. The FCC's website is this labyrinthine, confusing place. So basically, for like the cost of the application fee to the FCC, you can start your own pirate radio station or micro radio station. And there's a lot of disagreement over what these things should be called. I think free radio is probably a good term. Pirate radio sort of suggests, as cool as it sounds, it sort of suggests that there's something wrong happening, like pirates stole things and hurt people. In this case, pirate radio, you're not stealing anything. If you're being a good neighbor, you're not stepping on top of other radio stations. You're being respectful of other broadcasters in the area. You're being respectful of your neighbors. So there's really nothing nefarious going on there. So maybe free radio is a better term. Maybe unlicensed radio. Although I think free radio probably sounds more positive. Community radio is a pretty popular term as well. But one could argue that if you're using audio from places not in your community, that it's not really a community radio station. So I guess it would depend on how much locally oriented programming you were doing. And then, of course, micro radio is another term which sort of describes the relatively low wattage that typically accompanies these pirate radio stations. But then again, you don't have to use low wattage. I mean, if you can afford a high watt transmitter, then you can run that. If you can afford the equipment, and there's different levels of money that you can spend. But basically, for a few $100s, you can get your own radio station on the air. And if you want to spend more than that, then you can get a much more powerful station, the better antenna, all that stuff. We can talk a little bit more about the hardware options in a little bit. So being pretty disappointed by the legal process of starting a radio station, I got more and more into the idea of pirate radio. And at the time when I was doing this was probably the late 90s when I was looking into this. Obviously, the internet was relatively new, growing in popularity, but yet there were still some reports and websites out there about pirate radio. So I delved into as many as I possibly could, and I learned about the story of the party pirate in Tampa Bay. He was somebody who, what did he call himself? Craven Moorhead was his on-air handle, because pirates don't usually use their real names. And so Craven Moorhead was running this operation where he was, of course, a radio geek. So he had different types of, he had, I think, some like ham radio repeaters or some local. I think he was running like a repeater for the police in his town. So what he was doing was very kind of community oriented, and he actually had the support of the local government people in that particular case, which is kind of unusual. But because he was doing so much for them, I guess, at the same time. But that didn't stop them from being part of the inevitable FCC raid that took place on the Party Pirate in the late 1990s, where it was, I think, 6 in the morning. The FCC combined with like the FBI, the local sheriffs, the local cops, they were all there, 6 in the morning. They banged on his door. His wife, I guess, got up, answered the door. They come in, point guns at him and his wife, and held them hostage for a certain period of time while they searched through the house and all the stuff that was in there. They took all of his radio-related equipment and all kinds of stuff that wasn't even related to the radio station. So that was kind of my first experience. I mean, obviously I didn't experience it, but it was kind of my first exposure to how serious the government took this. And I thought, wow, they're really serious about stopping these pirates. Then there must be a reason for that, right? Like they're afraid of something. They're afraid of people with ideas getting on the air that haven't gone through this corporate structure. And that's a story that's going to scare a lot of people away. And it's certainly not the only story of people being aggressed against for running a radio transmitter. So there's risk involved in this, right? And that's kind of an important part to the activism that we all do. Is whenever there's a higher level of risk, there's also a possibility of a much higher level of reward. So, the reward here is getting the ideas of liberty out to your whole area, the entire transmission range. I mean, theoretically, a good percentage of the population could come across your signal and come across the ideas of freedom as a result of that. And so there's a risk concomitant with that level of success. And we can talk more about the FCC and what they can do and how things typically work with the FCC possibly coming after a radio station here in a little bit. So that got me into it, and I thought to myself, okay, well, if I'm going to do a pirate radio station, I mean, I was a teenager at the time. I certainly couldn't afford the equipment at that time, and I was living in my parents' house, so even if I could afford the equipment, I certainly wasn't going to be able to operate a radio station from their house. So at that point in my life, I decided, well, I'm going to shelve this idea, and if I'm going to end up doing pirate radio someday, maybe I should learn how to do broadcast radio in general. And so that's what I chose to do. I chose to my interest in pirate radio got me, I guess, inspired to get into broadcast radio, official radio in the radio world. And so I got an internship and started off that realm and learned about the business and learned about broadcasting. And obviously that led me to Free Talk Live, which led me to some level of financial success. And now I can take that money and invest it into helping other people do pirate radio. The reason I can't do pirate radio from my current location here at the LRN studios is because, number one, the RF is kind of an issue. That's like a technical situation, RF, radio interference. So if I've got a radio transmitter operating here, it's going to possibly interfere with some of the technical equipment I have. And it would just be a bad idea for me to run a pirate radio station from the LRN studios, because if the FCC wanted to go ahead and raid me for my broadcast equipment, you can damn well bet they're going to take all my automation servers and all the other things that I have here to run LRN, and then all of that would essentially result in all of the LRN stations out there, the great people that are running pirate radio stations with the LRN.FM signal, would all be taken off the air at the same time. So that doesn't mean that I'm not interested in pirate radio or am assisting in some way with the pirate radio stations here in New Hampshire. We've had one operating in Keene for quite a while. It's unfortunately off the air. And Manchester had operated one for quite a while as well. And they're off the air right now also due to FCC involvement, interference. Agents came sniffing around. You can actually go to the Free Keene Live YouTube channel, and you can see Sam and myself in our interaction with two FCC agents that had come snooping around his neighborhood. So again, that's YouTube/Free Keene Live. I don't know how far back it is, probably a couple months back, if you want to see what it was like. So again, we'll talk more about the FCC here in a little bit. So that's kind of my history. I got into broadcast for the purpose of learning about the radio business, and I did that, and now I can take some of my money and reinvest it into spreading the ideas of freeing the radio world, because really the radio business is suffering as a result of, and I've talked about this on Free Talk Live, it's suffering because of the FCC, because the FCC is there to supposedly protect radio stations. They're of course also protecting them from the competition that they need desperately to give them the incentive to innovate and to do something fresh and unique and try to keep their brands alive. It's good to have the internet finally competing with radio, but really they need more on-air competition on the dial. And pirate radio can be that solution. You don't have to invest a lot of money to do this. So it's just really it's the risk and whether or not you're willing to take that risk. We'll certainly talk more about what is really at risk. But let's talk about who the pirates are out there. Who is it that's taking this risk? For the most part, pirate radio operators tend to be either people that want to play their brand of music, because obviously corporate radio is fairly limited in its types of musical formats that it puts on. So somebody wants to play reggae or something like that, something unusual that's not typically heard on broadcast radio, there'll be someone that will get into pirate radio. Also, from the more political side, you tend to see the lefties doing it. You look at Free Radio Berkeley, there are a lot of pirate stations that have been on the air for a long time, actually, out in California. And that tends to be a fairly large group of the pirate radio segments, and they've been doing a great job at it. I mean, they're really good at building community around their operations, bringing volunteers in to help run the operation and to make it more than just a transmitter. So they're really good at that, and they've been people like Steve. I think Stephen Dunifer is his name, the guy with Free Radio Berkeley. He has been at it for years. I mean, these people are so dedicated to pirate radio that even if they do get raided, they set up shop again not too long thereafter, and they've got people who really support them and will come to their aid. But it's really the Liberty community, and I guess there are also the like the conspiracy radio stations as well. There's some of those. But in general, most pirates don't have the kind of dedication to their craft. If they get threatened by the FCC, it's game over. They're not going to stand up for their freedom to broadcast. They're not going to continue to broadcast in the face of potential threats, possible jail time and fines and things like that. It scares a lot of people away when the FCC comes sniffing around. It'll freak people out. So we need to see more people in the liberty movement getting involved, and I think that we're going to start seeing that, and that we are seeing that. And by the way, I do have the chat open, and I haven't been paying attention at all, so I'll ask for questions in a little bit. Yes, 105.1 is down in Manchester, unfortunately. The FCC did come snooping about, and for whatever reason, my chat has frozen, so I will refresh that. So yeah, we need more liberty-minded people involved in this. It is something that you can do on your own, but having more people involved is a nice thing. Like if you could have different locations to where if the FCC came and shut one location down or threatened to shut one location down, you just shut it down and move it somewhere else. They're not going to want to chase that around for too long. In fact, the FCC's enforcement division is fairly limited. I believe that they've shut down FCC field offices over the years. They've kind of shrunk that particular situation, and so the FCC, they only have field offices in certain cities. Here in New Hampshire, there's one in Boston. I think there's one in Tampa. I don't know where they all are, but there's odds are good you don't live somewhere where the FCC agents do live. So they have to hear about your operation from some sort of a report, some kind of snitch. Usually the snitch will be either someone who doesn't like what you're airing, or one of the local commercial radio operators that is upset because they've got their license and you didn't get yours. So that's likely where the FCC is going to get their complaint. The question is then, how long will it be before they actually act on the complaint? And who knows? For us here in Keene, it took probably about 5 months before they showed up. I think Manchester probably made it about 8. So you can be on the air for quite a long time, running 24 hours a day before these guys will even start sniffing around. All right, so there's one other thing here in this whole presentation about unlicensed radio. There is a legal way to go about this. For those of you that aren't willing to take any real significant risk, there's still risk involved even in the legal operation. But they have what they call Part 15, which is the FCC's, I guess, provision where they actually talk about what is legal to run, what kind of wattage or signal can you put out legally on the FM or the AM band to where you can't be shut down. There is no license to operate at these levels. And they're very, very low levels. For FM, Part 15 essentially means you're not going to broadcast past your quarter acre, wherever your house is. That's going to be about as far as that goes. So Part 15 on FM is pretty much a waste of time. Part 15 on AM is doable. There's a fairly robust hobbyist market surrounding Part 15 operations. There are even some operations where they link different AM Part 15 transmitters together to cover a larger swath of area. So Part 15 on AM is doable, but the equipment is fairly expensive. You're looking at $1,000, $600, $700 for a tenth of a watt transmitter. If you're going to spend that kind of money, you can get an FM transmitter that will transmit multiple watts, but obviously is highly illegal. If you're going to do Part 15, one of the problems with the Part 15, besides the transmission range and besides the fact that you really can only do it on AM, is that the FCC will still come hunting around for you. They will still get reports about you. They will come and they will want to see your studio. Now, the Part 15 operators tend to be the ham radio folks, the people that are kind of obedient to the FCC, and so they're proud. I've got my Part 15 operation, and come on in, FCC agents, poke around, check out my equipment. Uh, you're probably not going to want the FCC to come in anyway into your studio. So I generally would recommend against doing Part 15 if you really want to expose people to the ideas of freedom. If you want to expose people to the ideas, you've got to be on the FM band, and Part 15 really just doesn't play there. So some of the hardware that can be involved. There are somebody saying there's health risks having a radio transmitter close to one's house. That could be true. I honestly don't know about that. I wouldn't want to sleep next to a radio antenna, but on the other hand, putting it outdoors, properly mounting it, properly grounding it, running at a relatively low wattage, I wouldn't think that there'd be too big of a concern. There are radio engineers that, you know, they work full 8-hour days near 100,000 watt transmitters, and I don't hear of any kind of health issues that radio engineers have. So, how overblown those are, I'm not too sure. So, well, I mean, obviously, if you can put a transmitter away from your body, that's probably a good idea. Hardware. Okay, so there's a web page that I have set up over at lrn.fm, which, for those of you that don't know, lrn.fm stands for the Liberty Radio Network, and it is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week streaming audio channel where we feature live programming every single day of the week. Actually, there's quite a bit of live programming from noon to 10 o'clock at night on Sundays, and then 8 hours a day during the week as well, where we feature all liberty-oriented programming, principled hosts. This is not a crazy crackpot network, which is kind of like what all of the streaming networks have been up until LRN.FM. And the intention of LRN.FM is to give you kind of a plug-and-play solution for your radio station, because having a radio station or putting together a radio station, it's not a difficult task. It's pretty simple. You get a transmitter, you get an antenna, you get the cabling, you get the audio source, and you plug them all together and you make sure that they work, and you're on the air. That's not hard. The hard part is putting something on 24 hours a day. And Corey Moore says he's been on the crackpot networks, and LRN.FM rescued him from that. Glad to play a part. He's a good broadcaster. So it's not hard to put together the station. It is hard to put together programming, and that takes effort. You know, I've poured my money into it here. I've got professional radio automation software. We've got the audio codec set up so people can teleport in their audio. Corey's in Ohio, Ernie Hancock's in Phoenix. Of course, we've got shows here live in the LRN.FM studios as well. But it makes it so that you can just plug and play. You can take this audio, you can put it on the air, or put whatever it is you want on the air. If you want to take the time to do your own programming, by all means, go for it. But it's something that you can lean on. It's a crutch for you, that as long as we're on the air, you'll be on the air, and we've got kind of ways to ensure that we stay on. It's very rare that there's dead air over at LRN.FM. So on LRN.FM, there's a page that I've spent quite a bit of time on. It's the broadcast page, and when you go to LRN.FM, you'll see there's a menu up there, or you can just go to broadcast.lrn.fm, and it'll take you right to it. But the broadcast page is very detailed. Well, first, actually, when you go to broadcast, there's two different options. Then just click, I want my own LRN.FM radio station. And that's where you will get a very technical rundown of exactly how to do this. So, I mean, I'm not going to read this to you or anything like that, but I will sort of summarize what is, thank you, Corey, for posting that to the chat room. I will summarize what is there. It goes through different options, and it's fairly extensive. There's also a link to a forum as well, where you can talk to other people that have done these things or are doing these things. We're like radio engineering types hanging out. They give you, they'll give you tips and suggestions. Great people, really well informed. I'm not an engineer. I have the ability to put these things together. I can connect the wires together, and I can make these things work. but I don't know about broadcast engineering. I know a little bit, but I would never consider myself an engineer. You don't need to be an engineer to know how to do this stuff, especially with the cheaper equipment. I mean, if some of this stuff is so cheap, if it burns up, no big deal. Get yourself another transmitter. So there's different ways to receive the audio from LRN.FM. There are different types of transmitters that you can get for different budgets. And on that page at broadcast.lrn.fm, we go down it all. We go down the low budget stuff, the higher budget stuff, the different delivery methods. One of the neat things that we're doing, Corey Moore was talking about earlier in his presentation about how when you're transmitting on the internet, when you're doing streaming, that you have to pay for every single listener. And that's generally a true statement. If you've got a lot of listeners, then that could be really expensive. So one of the things we did to, I guess, help alleviate that is created the free-to-air satellite. The KU band satellite is not as popular here in the United States as it is, say, over in Europe, where it's incredibly popular. Like, I think there's something like 180 million free-to-air users in Europe. But free-to-air means it's unencrypted. So anybody with the right equipment can receive these free-to-air broadcasts, and they can listen to and watch. There's TV channels, there's radio channels up there. It's mostly foreign language stuff. It's also a lot of religious stuff. And then there's a couple of liberty-oriented networks with LRN.FM included. So it costs a lot of money to be up on free-to-air satellite. It's not free for us. So that's what I've linked to with our chip-in on agora.io when you see me on the speakers list, or on the right-hand side of LRN.FM, you can see we've raised some money. That amount isn't the exact amount that it costs. Actually, it's less expensive than that, so I kind of set the goal a little higher, because obviously there's other things I could spend the money on, like buying free-to-air satellite channels outside of North America. I think it would be pretty cool to have LRN.FM broadcast in Australia and in Europe or around the world. If you look at an organization like Russia Today, RT, they actually have 13, their signals on 13 satellites, I think, around the globe, and 11 of those 13 are free-to-air transmissions. So ideally, it would be great to have this signal transmitted to anywhere someone could understand English. Right now, we cover all of North America, and you can see our map there over at broadcast.lrn.fm. Or actually, I think that there's another shortcut that I made for it, but I'm spacing out on what that is right now. Anyway, the map shows you that we cover all of Canada, all of the United States, all of Mexico. So if you are in North America, technically you could use that satellite signal to put a receiver out in the middle of nowhere and broadcast. You don't need to have an internet connection to receive LRN.FM's signal. I guess that's the most important point. The equipment for free-to-air is very cheap. It's incredibly popular worldwide. So receivers are, $100. If you want to get a nice, more kind of broadcast quality one, $200. And of course, we link to different suggested receivers and options for you there on the website. Of course, internet streaming is another option, and I've got props today. Here is one of them. This little box. Make sure you're seeing that. Yep. This little box is a Barrett's box, and it's very simple. It's got your standard red-white RCA style outputs on it. You got your connection for the internet there. You hook this up to internet. You set it up with their on-screen menu system through your web browser, and you hook it up to whatever internet stream you want to, preferably LRN.FM. And that little box will essentially operate as a computer, so that way you don't have to have a laptop running Windows or something that could crash, possibly to cause problems with the audio. You've got a dedicated receiver that is going to run 24 hours a day. It runs relatively cool. Obviously, it doesn't take a whole lot of watts to run this. It's basically a little box running Linux that does nothing but connect to internet streams. Great little box. It'll cost you $200. So, less than the cost of a computer, and they're very, very reliable. The company, again, is Barracks, and again, that is linked to over on LRN.FM. You're telling me the audio is kind of low. I haven't heard any other complaints about that, so if that is saying dead on, okay, good. I won't worry about that. So, KU band satellite, internet streaming, those are your two primary audio delivery methods to receive LRN.FM content. And then you've got to figure out and then again, there's different equipment recommendations there for different budgets. And then you've got the question of, well, okay, now you've got your audio source, where the audio is coming from. And for those of you that don't want to do LRN.FM, you want to create your own system, we recommend different audio automation systems. There are free ones out there on the internet. I mentioned Zara Radio earlier during Corey's presentation. Zara Radio is a free radio automation software system that you can pay for it as well and get some extra features out of it. So if you wanted to schedule your own audio, you can do that. It just obviously takes a lot more effort. And you have to have a dedicated computer to run that as well. So once you've got your audio source, once you know what it is you want to put on the air, then you have to have the equipment that's necessary to actually put it on the air. And we go into that also over at the broadcast page on LRN.FM. So you need to decide on what kind of transmitter you want. Do you want to, how much, really the only question is how much you want to spend. You can go on eBay and you can order a transmitter and an antenna and get it for as cheap as a couple $100, and they'll send you all the stuff that you need. Now, how reliable are those transmitters? Honestly, I don't know. I haven't ever experimented with them. The only transmitter I have experience with is the PX50 from Ramsey. I'll try to speak a little bit louder. I could turn my mic up, but there was this kind of annoying noise in the background. Yeah, I'm not using my professional equipment here to do this, just using a laptop webcam. So there's this, Chinese brands out there that manufacture these transmitters for dirt cheap. And like I was saying, if one of them goes bad, it's not a huge deal to buy another one. But if you want something more reliable, you probably should get into the more professional realm. And of course, then you are getting into paying more. The more the wattage, the more professional the transmitter, the more you're going to pay. The ones that I'm familiar with are approximately $2,000 transmitters from Ramsey Electronics. There are other ones from other brands, and I linked to the forum over at LRN.FM, where we've got several links. In fact, it's actually part of the Free Talk Live BBS because it's just not it's not popular enough to warrant its own separate forum. But you can go to broadcast.lrn.fm. You'll find the link there. But there are a bunch of links there to different manufacturers and different vendors of the different more professional transmitters. And then you want to pick an antenna as well. And of course, there are lots of options. They have directional antennas. So maybe your transmitter location is going to be on the outside edge of whatever metro it is you're going to be broadcasting toward, and you don't want to send signal out into the cow fields as much as you want to send it into the city. That might be something to where you would prefer to have a directional antenna. Directional antennas are going to cost you a little bit more, and honestly, I don't have any links to any directional antennas because I know they're out there. I think that maybe they are on our forum. I think somebody might have posted some links there, but I'm sure if you look for FM directional transmitter antennas, you'll find them. As far as omnidirectional antennas are concerned, I have experimented with the Comet and the one from Ramsey. They're essentially identical. They can handle up to 200 watts, which is going to be far more than most pirate free radio transmitters you'll be able to get your hands on. So it handles the wattage pretty well, and they're not really very large. I mean, on the scale of antennas, of course, then again, I don't know what you consider large. I would guess maybe about the height of a human being, perhaps. And so you can get those for about $100. So, I mean, you're talking about a couple hundred for an antenna and a transmitter, or a few hundred for that, another couple hundred for like the audio source. You can do this for less than $1,000. You can do it, I think, fairly well for less than $1,000. If you put a couple of other ones in there, I'm getting a little distracted here. So, is it just Kyle that's having problems with the audio? Anyway, I tested it before it went on. It sounded fine. So yeah, for a couple $100, you can get a cheapy transmitter, a cheapy antenna, and plug your computer into it, and you're on the air. For a few $100, you can get equipment that's a little bit nicer. For over $1,000, you can get into the more professional kind of stuff. All right, well, I will turn up the audio here since people are complaining. Is that any better? Hopefully it's not distorting at this point. Can you hear me now? Better now? Too loud? Better now? Audio's fine? Okay. Anybody else complains, it's your fault. So, once you get your equipment together, then you need to learn a thing or two about how to actually put it together to make it work. We do have some suggestions also on the broadcast page at lrn.fm to help you do that. One thing you want to know about for sure is standing wave ratio, and this gets into kind of the more engineering aspect of doing this, because it's easy to plug the stuff together. That's not hard. It's not complicated. But you need to know about standing wave ratio if you're using a more professional, especially if you're using more professional equipment. You want to know about it generally anyway, because it's important to your transmission. Standing wave ratio basically means how much, it's a kind of a measure of how much of your transmission is being reabsorbed by the transmitter itself. And you don't want that to happen. You want your transmission to go outwards, not back in. So there are certain factors that come into play here, and this is where being an engineer would be better for me, because I don't really know a whole lot about it, but I know that like if there's metal around, that could be reflecting things back into your transmitter. So you want to, that's why you want to have your antenna mounted properly. You want it preferably to be outdoors. I've seen it. I've seen antennas mounted like inside barns and things like that. That's good. Just anything to where you can get things away from the antenna. It's very important. Properly mounting it, properly grounding it. You know, sinking a pole in the ground, sinking a grounding rod there, connecting the grounding rod, making sure that that's taken care of. Those are important things. And you can actually get a standing wave ratio meter, an SWR meter, and plug that into your transmission or into your antenna chain, basically, to make sure that that it's working. Klaas mentions antenna tuners for the win. I don't even know what an antenna tuner is. It just goes to show you that you know, I really am not an engineer. I do know that you need to tune your antenna to a certain frequency. So once you decide on what frequency you want to be on, you should tune your antenna to that frequency. Because if your antenna is not tuned to that frequency, you're guaranteed to have a bad SWR. So it's very important that you have to take SWR into to this configuration. So more professional transmitters like the Ramsey PX50 actually have the SWR meter built into them. But the stuff that you pay a couple $100 for on eBay from China, not going to be the case. You're going to need to check that with a separate SWR meter. And one of the other things that you want to keep in mind with those cheapy transmitters is, you know, there is a quality issue to some extent. There could be a quality issue with not having what they call a low-pass filter. And again, these are all things that are addressed on the lrn.fm page about broadcasting. But the low-pass filter essentially blocks out what they call harmonics from causing interference with channels that are maybe up the line from you. You can learn more about harmonics. It basically means that whatever the frequency you're on, if you double it, your transmission will be there unless you're blocking it with a low-pass filter. And again, more professional transmitters have these low-pass filters built into them. Those that are more cheaply made do not. So you would need to add in a low-pass filter after your transmitter. So you would have your cheap transmitter, a low-pass filter to make sure you're being a good radio neighbor, check your SWR, and if you've got a good SWR, you can take the SWR meter out of the chain and just connect your antenna into your low-pass filter and it'll run that way. But you do want to make sure you find a good channel to be on as well. This is important. Once you've got all your equipment together, you need to know where a good clear channel is to operate on. And there are different reasons for this. Number one, you want to be a good radio neighbor. It's bad form to step on other existing broadcasters. Not only is it bad form and rude, but it's also going to guarantee they report you real quick, like to the FCC. So just be a good neighbor. Make sure you operate on a clear channel. Now, there are different ways to figure this out. One of those ways is if you're in the United States, you can use the handy tool at Radio Locator. So go to radio-locator.com and there's actually an an FM frequency finder tool there where you punch in your zip code. I think you can punch in your city and state, and it will actually show you the FM band and which channels are most available, which channels are the clearest, which channels are a little less clear, and which channels aren't quite as clear. And you want to pick the clearest channels. So that'll give you some starting points, but that's not the end-all be-all. As they suggest there, you take the channels that you find with their tool, and then you actually hop in your car, turn on your car radio, tune to that channel, or those different channels, and actually listen to make sure that there's no one there, to make sure that there's not some station skipping in from a nearby town or a nearby city, or that there's not some other pirate operator that's operating on that channel. So not only should you hop in your car and turn it on, you should also drive around where you intend to broadcast, what you intend your city to be. So I would drive around here in Keene, and I would go out different directions, and I would listen on one channel. And yeah, you're going to be listening to static. Hopefully, that's what you're hoping for, is that you don't actually encounter any radio stations. So you want to find the clearest channel possible, and you want to put some time into determining what that channel is going to be. And once you find out what that channel is, that's when you want to tune your antenna for that channel so you can get the best possible standing wave ratio. So other tips for equipment. If you've got something that's relatively low wattage, and most of these pirate transmitters are 5 watts. If, like here in Keene, New Hampshire, a 5-watt transmitter with a good antenna height is going to cover the whole town. You don't have to go crazy with spending money to get good wattage. The most important part, and this is another kind of technical engineering aspect, but it's very simple. The most important part is not how many watts you have. It's your antenna and where it's located. So most importantly, when I say where, I mean how high it is located. We're talking FM. If you're on AM, it's a whole different situation. There's antennas with AM, I don't know anything about. You have to ground them with like a crazy ground plane thing, and it's a little more complicated. FM, it's all about height. It's about line of sight transmission. So if you can put an antenna up on a hill, that's the way to go. If you have to have it in a valley, make sure that it's up as high as it can possibly be. I mean, in general, you want to make sure it's as high as it can possibly be. Of course, there are issues with local governments and possible regulations about how high antennas could be. So that's kind of another area where the state aggressors could come in and possibly come after you. So it may not just be the FCC that you'd be taking a risk with in those cases. But generally, in most places, you can put an antenna up because there are plenty of radio hobbyists. There may be some sort of height limitation, and I'll leave that to you to decide on whether or not you care about those sorts of things. But get your antenna up as high as possible, mount it properly, ground it properly. And if you don't know someone who can do that stuff, find someone handy to assist you with that. All right, uninterruptible power supply seems like a no-brainer, but make sure that my chat keeps kind of freezing up here. Seems like a no-brainer, but it's a good investment for $100 or whatever. If you're just running a 50-watt transmitter, a 5-watt transmitter, you don't need a big UPS. Just something to keep you on the air and keep your transmitter from being zapped by some sort of a power surge or something like that. It's just a smart thing to have. You want to keep your station on the air, especially during bad weather and things like that. All right, so we're up to about the 440 mark here, and I have hit the refresh on the chat. So if y'all have any questions, I've kind of gone over the hardware aspect of this stuff. I've gone over the audio source aspect. I've gone over some of the other issues. I guess I should touch on the FCC. I said we would talk about that. So, what to do if the FCC comes sniffing around? And that's what they're going to do first, likely. Now, fair warning, there's a guy on the Free Radio Forum that I was telling you about earlier, which is linked to from broadcast.lrn.fm. There's a guy there who claims that his first contact with the FCC was a raid. Now, that's the only time I've ever heard that happening, ever. Most of the time, the way it works is this. The FCC agents will come sniffing around your property. They want to find out if it is you. If it is coming from, they'll triangulate the signal. They'll figure out generally where it's coming from. And they will triangulate to where you are or where the transmitter is. So they'll start sniffing around. They'll come knocking on doors. They'll talk to neighbors. Oh, and by the way, that reminds me. Uh, Speaking of respecting neighbors, you also need to respect your neighbors. One issue with doing this in an urbanized area is that if your neighbors listen to the radio, then there's a chance that your station could be interfering simply because of the proximity in the RF, that your station could be interfering with their radios. So having it properly, your antenna properly mounted and grounded is important. And if that happens, hopefully you've got good relations with your neighbors to where you would be able to talk to them about these things. But then again, maybe you don't want to talk to them about it. So it's kind of an iffy issue. Obviously, broadcasting away from other people will solve that problem. But if you do have that issue, we encountered that here in Keene, where somebody actually contacted me. They found my email address, and even though I wasn't the one running the station, I certainly was aware of the station and who was operating it. And so this person was receiving interference from the station. I verified. I asked them to tell me where they lived, and indeed, that person was living near where the broadcaster was. So it wasn't somebody just BSing us. And so one of the things we did was we cut the wattage in half, and that solved the problem. Also, we made sure that the antenna was properly mounted. I don't think it was at that time. So we cut the wattage in half. That solved the problem. And actually, having the wattage is not going to have your distance. In fact, I don't know what it's called. There's some sort of formula that has to do with how much wattage and how much distance you get out of that wattage. But essentially, the more you increase the wattage, the distance doesn't increase a whole lot more the more the wattage gets, which is why like a 5-watt transmitter could really do quite a bit. So you don't have to go crazy with wattage. And make sure that you're not interfering with your neighbors. One of the ways you can do that maybe is by taking a cheap clock radio or something like that outside your house when you're transmitting, when you're testing your transmitter, and kind of walk around the perimeter of your property and change to different nearby channels and make sure that you're not interfering with those. Because if you're using like a cheap receiver, then that kind of, as opposed to like a good receiver with a lot of with good selectivity, then that might be a way to kind of verify that you're doing things right. So back to the FCC. So they're going to come sniffing around. They're going to knock on doors of neighbors. They're going to ask questions. So like with any cops, you don't have to answer. You don't have to answer the door. In fact, that would probably be the best idea, to not answer the door. But if you do answer the door, because you may not know who they are and you may be friendly, you may want to answer the door. Once they identify themselves as the FCC or start asking questions about a radio station, you certainly have no obligation whatsoever to answer their questions. What they want to do is they want to find out who's operating it. And of course, a lot of these operators are, they're not informed on their rights. They just want to get their music on the radio. So it's going to be different when the FCC shows up at a liberty-oriented activist house to do this stuff. They're not used to dealing with people like us. They're not used to dealing with people that know their rights, that have a video camera that they're going to pull out on them and record the situation. Like I said, on our Free Keene Live channel on YouTube, you can see our interactions with these FCC agents, and they were not happy about us doing that. So they're not used to dealing with that kind of stuff. Don't answer their questions. Don't give them your name. Don't give them your landlord's name. They want a name to write on a notice of apparent liability. This is their first step typically, is to issue a notice saying, hey, we know you're operating this radio station. We're going to hold you responsible for it if you don't stop. And this is what we might do. We might give you a $10,000 fine. We might try to put you in jail. I don't think anyone's ever gone to jail for running a pirate radio operation. In fact, there's a document over at I think it's the Free Radio Berkeley site that talks more about the FCC and kind of the legal issues. There's no one who has ever actually taken the FCC to court on a freedom of speech issue for pirate radio, I believe. I mean, obviously, I'm not a compendium of legal history, but most of these guys, they break. They stop broadcasting. It's over. Whether they pay the fine or not is another issue, but whether the FCC can actually get that fine out of you is another question. Because you could technically take them to court on that if you wanted to. I mean, what's going to happen if you refuse to pay the FCC's fine? I don't know. No one's ever gotten to that point. Or actually, excuse me, I think there was a guy in the Boston area that refused to pay the fine. And I don't think they can do anything because they don't want to go to court on this issue. They don't want to go to court on the freedom of speech issue. So if you're willing to make a stand, this may be a very good issue to make a stand on. If you're not willing to make a stand, when the FCC comes sniffing around, just turn the transmitter off. Find somewhere else to move it to. And this is where having other activists in the area can come in handy. If you're not alone, if you've got other people that might be also willing to step up and host a transmitter, then flip it off. Wait a few days, wait for the FCC to go back to their field office, and then flip it back on at a different location, and let them play, let them chase a signal around over a period of months and months. Because again, they've got a lot on their plate. They've got a lot of different transmitters that they're sniffing around for, and they're probably not going to be able to come back right away. So keep that in mind too. Um, what can you do if you can't take the risk? And I hope I've not missed anyone's questions here. How do you know when they are on your trail? They'll show up. that's when you'll know. You won't know until then. What to do if you can't take the risk? You can support those who can take the risk. You can pay for the equipment, because sometimes those who can take the risk may not be the ones who can afford the equipment. So team up and get the job done together. Obviously, you can spread the word about the station. You can post flyers. You can tell your friends. Word of mouth is the way pirate radio stations get around, obviously. And even if you do shut the transmitter off, the people that are your listeners will be checking for you. They will, from time to time, they will come back to your frequency to see if you're still there. Alan Hall asks, should you turn the transmitter off immediately, as in within the hour they are sniffing around, or should you give them plausible deniability and wait a minute or two to shut it off? Well, that's a good question, and I don't have a definitive answer for you on that. They can't prove it was you that turned it off. They don't know, the first time they're sniffing around, they don't know who the operator is. So there's no proof that it was you that shut it off, so I don't think it matters either way. What else can you do if you can't take the risk? Well, you can again support people financially who are doing this. You can also support LRN.FM because we're encouraging people to do this stuff. As I mentioned, there's a very detailed page, the broadcast page over at LRN.FM with lots of equipment suggestions, price ranges, and stuff like that, where we're encouraging people to step up and do this. And it costs money to run LRN.FM. I got no problem plugging my money into it. Obviously, it's my hobby. It's what I'm doing. Maybe someday it'll make some money for me. I don't know. I don't expect it to. I don't really care whether it does or not. What I care about is getting the ideas of liberty out into people's ears, and this is one of the most effective ways to do it. So there's a little chip in over there on the right-hand side of LRN.FM that helps us pay for that free-to-air satellite channel, and I know that there was a channel in Ohio, or a transmitter in Ohio for a while that was using that satellite channel to receive the audio. Of course, with satellite, unlike internet, we have no idea how many people are receiving that. And of course, people can just receive the satellite channel just as a listener as well. So you can do that too. Let's see, how much bandwidth would an LRN broadcast consume per month, says James. Well, it's 64 kilobits per second is our broadband stream. We have a dial-up stream, but that's going to sound like shit on the air, so you don't want to use that. Use the broadband stream. 64K, that's not a whole lot of bandwidth. But if you're paying by the bandwidth, well, maybe that is an issue for you. So you'll have to do that calculation, take 64K and then per second, and then calculate it out for whatever a month is. Let's see, what else? Can we get a land of the free? Well, yeah, clearly the FCC sucks, but they're not going away anytime soon. So this is going to take people who are willing to take a risk. How could we get LRN.FM programming introduced to our local broadcast stations? Well, most local broadcasters aren't going to be interested in the LRN programming because honestly, it's not delivered in the package that radio stations are used to. Radio stations are used to receiving things from professional delivery methods, and the KU band isn't really a professional delivery method. I mean, it gets the job done, and it's a cheap way to deliver audio by satellite, but most stations are taking their audio from professional methods like Citadel and Clear Channel. Free Talk Live is available via those professional methods, but the rest of the LRN FM programming is not. And that's because Free Talk Live is also affiliated with GCN, and they're the people that pay the satellite bill for those professional methods. The cost for that is approximately $100,000 a year, whereas we wouldn't spend more than 10 on the KU band methods. So if you want to get some LRN programming on, the only way to really do it would be Free Talk Live. There are smaller stations that might be interested in some of the LRN programming, like smaller stations in smaller markets may be willing to use a KU band receiver, so it's not completely unheard of that someone would do that. What's the best way to find and build local sponsors within range when first getting started? Well, to have local sponsors, you would need to have the ability to play local commercials. You'd need to have an automation system. And actually, I go through that on the broadcast page. At the very bottom of the page, there's suggestions on how to take your broadcast to the next level. So you could have LRN FM programming running all day long, and then you could have your local show if you want. You want to do a local show, you pot down the LRN programs, you pot up your microphones, and you go with your local show. How you find sponsors for that, it's only going to be worth so much. That's a good question. What if you go off the air? Then you're going to have to pay your sponsors money back. Honestly, I've never gotten into that aspect of pirate radio, so I can't really answer too much about that. And I'm just about out of time. But remember, there is a forum over linked to from the broadcast page at lrn.fm. And so if you've got questions, there are a lot of helpful people that are in there that can help you out with that. I hope this has been informative for you. And thanks for listening. So I guess that wraps it up. And thank you again, George, for putting this on. I think it's been an incredible success. And of course, Free Talk Live is on tonight, and you can listen to lrn.fm any old time you want to. See you guys. I'll hang out in the chat room for a little bit too if you've got questions.